Business Weekly, brought to you by National Social Security Fund. NSSF, we secure your future.
Ahead on this week's edition, we take a look at Kenya's sole oil refinery, the Kenya Petroleum Refinery Limited, and we also talk to Wanjiko Manyara, the Executive Director at the Petroleum Institute of East Africa. That's on the executive wing. Remember that you can send in your questions, observations or comments to the SMS number 8041 or email address ktnbizweekly@standardmedia.co.ke. Good evening and welcome to this edition of KTN Business Weekly. I'm Michael Oyer. On the 1st of July, the Kenya Petroleum Refinery Limited was ushered into the uncharted waters of competition in its more than 3 decades of existence. By law, the refinery turned into a merchant, which means that it will be sourcing for its own crude oil, refining the crude oil and seeking a market for it. However, the question still does remain as to whether the refinery has the capacity to compete effectively in the volatile petroleum industry.
The Kenya Petroleum Refineries Limited, KPRL, last week signed a financing agreement with the Standard Chartered Bank PLC to enable the refinery to roll out its business transformation plan. Through the signing, KPRL will be able to access $250 million to aid in the transformation process from a toll refinery to a merchant refinery. Basically, to mean KPRL will now be able to procure oil, process it, and sell the petroleum products to oil marketing companies in the ratio of their respective market shares, unlike was the case previously when the various oil marketing companies would bid for the tenders through the open tender system, import, and give the crude to KPRL to process for them at a fee.
The quantity of crude is the same. The difference is that the crude now will be imported and owned by the refinery as the main buyer of all the crude.
Amount required is roughly $400 million, which is a big amount. We started talking to various banks, and we are thankful to Standard Chartered Bank who came forward. And on 20th of June last month, we have signed a loan agreement for the working capital amounting to $250 million.
Following the agreement, KPRL has already placed an order for the first batch of Marban crude oil from Abu Dhabi, and that is expected to be loaded Thursday 5th this month and delivered between the 16th and 18th July 2012.
The challenge is for us to get into a relationship with a financial institution or financial institutions to finance the purchase of crude oil. And as Mr. Bansal has said earlier, we've already crossed that milestone with the signing of the finance agreement with Standard Chartered Bank on the 20th of June. So in terms of the capacity for us as a country to go forth with these plans, certainly the answer is yes. You know, it's the same volume, and we have financial institutions willing to fund this activity.
However, what concerns many industry players is the fact that the refinery, as set up in the 1960s, has received very minimal upgrades to better its systems, if any, and the dilapidated structures are only but playing a key role in increasing its inefficiencies, a fact that can best be explained by the soaring prices at the pump. It is estimated that the total amount of money you pay as a consumer per litre, say of petrol, at least 7 shillings, is as a result of the refinery's inefficiencies, and the firm too cannot agree more.
Even though our refinery capacity, KPRL refinery capacity is 4 million tons per annum, we are allowed to process 1.6 million tons per annum of crude oil only, mainly because the refinery is very old, design is very old, and the configuration is very simple configuration. Mostly it is a distillation refinery.
If you look at the background, the refinery was owned 50% by the government and 50% by the other multinationals. Why did the multinationals pull out? It's because this refinery is very old, very inefficient. And for you to invest you might as well want to, spend that money putting up a new one. And I think, so we have a situation where the people who bought the refinery, or whose the refinery has been concessioned to, SR, is not actually investing into modernizing it, because they require hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. Instead, what is happening is that the same old inefficient refinery that should have been shut down years ago is what they took over and what they're running.
KPRL lacks a secondary refinery that can refine the residues of the first process into more products for possibly the export market, hence, in fact, end up importing more oil products. The port congestion is not helping the situation either. Demurrage costs at the Kilindini port are afterwards factored into the eventual retail price of the respective final product. Currently, the refinery processes 1.6 million metric tons of crude oil per annum, and with this transition, it is expected that it will not only process the Marban crude oil from Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, but it will have also the option of sourcing of more economical crude oils. Hence, needless to say, the recent move by government to import 4 million tons of Iranian crude oil per year, or a total of about 30 million barrels over 1 year, equivalent to around 80,000 barrels per day.
We expect that, or rather it is freedom is given to the KPRL to buy its own crude. So we expect that we will be able to buy crude on a very, very competitive terms. We will be free to not only process the Murban crude. We would like to process the crudes which give us the maximum netback value, and we may even think of processing the crude in admixture, in blended form.
Maybe too soon to celebrate. Previously, oil marketing companies, or OMCs, signed contractual agreements and paid up front for products that may not have necessarily been delivered to them. And with a change in the way of operation, KPRL could be heading for a confrontation with some of the OMCs seeking to reconcile their books of account prior to the new way of handling business.
As oil market companies, we will not, because we lose money, and we cannot lose money to another entity. SR, which now literally runs or owns the refinery, is an oil marketing company. They are also in downstream like us. They are, for all practical purposes, they are competitors in the industry. So you cannot run your business with my money, and I shut down mine. It doesn't make sense. So I think it's important that before the transition, this reconciliations are done and our accounts are settled.
Industry regulator, the Energy Regulatory Commission (ERC), in the meantime, has moved to dispel fears that the refinery's transformation into merchant will result in an upward adjustment of pump prices, saying the costing structure will remain basically the same. As a matter of fact, in the new dispensation, the yield pattern will henceforth compel KPRL to attain certain targets, without which no compensations will be advanced.
The way it works is like, for example, when you get crude, you yield into products, usually products which are more expensive than crude. So the more of the higher value products you get, the better. So that's the yield pattern. So we shall agree on a pattern, and we have approved the pattern, so that they have as a minimum to produce that pattern, or if they don't, then they are paid only up to the level of that pattern which is approved.
It is expected that the upgraded refinery will be able to process sour and heavy crudes, improving quality of products which will meet the AFRI-4 standards. The sour and heavy crudes are cheaper, unlike the current sweet and light crudes. The refinery has been processing sweet and light crudes which are deemed expensive. Government projects the upgrade work to take up to 5 years at a cost of between 30 and 40 billion shillings.
Time for a break now, but when we return, our guest on the executive wing is Wanjiko Manyara. She's the executive director at the Petroleum Institute of East Africa. Stay with KTN Business Weekly. Welcome back. Kenya's petroleum sector has seen many growth opportunities over the years. In this week's Executive Wing, Wanjiko Manyara takes us through the growth in the industry.
Everyone has been talking about oil, especially after the discovery of oil by Tullow Oil in Turkana in Gamia 1. And today we speak to the Professional Association of the Oil Industry. With us is the Chief Executive Officer of the PIA, the Petroleum Institute of East Africa, and that is Wanjiko Manyara. Thank you so much for gracing us with your coming. I would like to begin by wanting to know your general overview of the oil industry, and of course highlight to us the opportunities that Kenya now has under the new scenario.
As you know, the petroleum industry has been expanding. If you just look at the growing consumption of petroleum products, not just in Kenya but also across the region. Lately there has also been some expansion in terms of, and also enhancement in terms of the infrastructure. You have seen that the pipeline has expanded, or at least enhanced or replaced Line 4 into Western Kenya. And Line 1 is about, the replacement of what is known as Line 1 is also about to commence. There's also been a number of storage and distribution facilities that oil marketing companies have invested in. Again, this is meant to ensure that demand is met efficiently and that there is security of supply.
We did mention earlier about the issue of discovery of oil in Turkana, and already there's so much public outcry on how the wananchi on the ground perceive the whole aspect is being, reviewed or looked at. They think they're already being sidelined even before the oil find is a reality. What are some of the best practices we should adopt so that we ensure that this oil in Kenya does not turn into a curse?
It's important to have certain instruments and certain best practices, of course, adopted, and also standards, or at least borrowed from, for example, the EITI, what is known as the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which, of course, endeavors to ensure that there is transparency, that there is accountability. And when that happens, then obviously the chances of suspicion are reduced or eliminated altogether.
Yeah, and that brings me to the other aspect about the Kenya Petroleum Refineries Limited, KPRL. We know that KPRL is now planning to transform into merchant, and there's so much information that is out there that is mixed. Do you think we as a country, Kenya, are ready for this institution, and how is it going to look like when it takes effect?
Let me first say that it's actually not new that the refinery is going merchant. This is a decision that was agreed upon by stakeholders in as early as last year, following a stakeholders meeting that was held firstly in Mombasa and later on in May last year. And that was one of the resolutions which was agreed upon by all stakeholders in a bid to make the refinery more efficient, hence reduce the costs that arise from it and that are then impacted on at the retail pump price. So in a nutshell, it's a process that the refinery has been transiting into. And not on its own, there's actually a task force that was constituted that was comprising of both the marketers, the refinery, and other stakeholders. So the refinery will continue to process as it had been processing. It will continue to process crude. The change is that it will now shift into a regime of yield guarantee, which means that the oil marketing companies will be guaranteed or supplied actual products that has been processed by the refinery according to each market share which has been agreed upon every quarter, which means that is what they'll pay for.
So what other aspects do you think the industry needs to understand, or the general public needs to understand in as far as the whole issue of the transformation of KPRL is concerned?
Okay, perhaps I can add that the benefit of one of the other benefits of KPRL going merchant is that obviously there will be product available at the KPRL because they'll process and then sell it off to the OMCs. And the other thing is that the OMCs, the oil marketing companies, will not tie up their working capital as they previously would have, or as they previously did through the deemed stocks. So they'll be able to free that working capital, which is beneficial. And obviously, like I mentioned, this is a continuation of the road towards the modernization of the refinery, which is a good thing, which means that within a given time frame, which is yet to be really completely agreed upon, given the latest developments where we've discovered oil, and obviously it then perhaps means that the KPRL needs to go back to the drawing board with a kind of to decide on the kind of selection that had previously been agreed upon with regard to the processing, because you don't want to pump money into the upgrade and then you realize that the selection you had agreed upon in terms of refining is not able to support the kind of crude that has been found in the tertiary rift.
Thank you so much. I believe we'll engage again more to understand much more about the industry. Well, you've heard from the Chief Executive Officer of the Petroleum Institute of East Africa yourself, and of course KTN will endeavor to highlight more other pertinent issues in as far as business is concerned and the whole economy is concerned. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. I'm Zawadi Mdibo.
Onto the money markets, and the Kenya shilling is finding comfort in the 83.90 to 84.50 range against the US dollar. Over the past days, it has been exchanging at an average of 84.12, while to the sterling pound, it's trading at a mean of 132.08 against the euro. The home unit is exchanged at 106.02, while closer home to the South African rand, it has been weakening slightly to an average of 10.34. Well, that's all we had time for this Wednesday. Let's do it again next week. Remember that you can send in your comments or questions to the email address ktnbizweekly@standardmedia.co.ke or to the text number 8041. From myself and the entire team, thank you for watching. I'm Michael Oyer. Good night.
Business Weekly, brought to you by National Social Security Fund. NSSF, we secure your future.